Amat merat ike tesol derat ik merut.
In Plato's Meno, we are introduced to a discussion between Socrates and Meno, who are discussing whether or not virtue is teachable. During that discussion, the topic of whether virtue is knowledge is brought up. It is that question that this series of videos will explore. We'll begin with the question of how virtue is defined, using the works of Plato and Aristotle, as well as authors like Christine Swanton and Rosalind Hursthouse will explore various definitions throughout the years, examining the idea of how it may relate to knowledge. This series of videos will then examine the Aristotelian account of virtue. Through the works of people like Gerald J. Hughes and John McDowell, we'll explore Aristotle's idea that virtue is a form of practical wisdom. It involves developing the intellectual skills necessary to be able to respond appropriately to particular situations we may find ourselves presented with, looking at how the virtues may relate to each other and how we must develop an understanding of how to apply those virtues appropriately to situations. It describes a difference between a technical skill, or technai, and the skill of virtue, or erotai, exploring why they are different, what makes them different, and the understanding necessary. Looking at the idea of why virtue is more than just responding to a situation in the way one sees a virtuous person respond to a situation. It is about understanding why a virtuous person would respond that way, and understanding why we should respond that way. We'll explore Julia Driver's criticism that there are certain virtues that rely on epistemic defects, and therefore cannot be considered a form of knowledge. They are instead a form of ignorance, using the example of modesty. We will also explore Michael Jeffrey Winter's response to Driver's criticism, using his account of modesty to show that modesty is not a form of epistemic defect, but is instead a form of honesty, as well as knowing and understanding the circumstances that have led to our successes, as well as admitting to those circumstances that enabled us to achieve our successes. We'll then go on to explore, through the work of authors like Dominic Scott and Rosalind Weiss, the argument made by Socrates in Plato's Meno that virtue is not knowledge, but is only true opinion, beginning with Socrates' argument that virtue is a form of knowledge, or that knowledge is at least a component of virtue. Then through to the argument that it is only a form of true opinion. In the final video, we'll look at a summation of the arguments presented before us, and argue for the idea that while it might not match a stricter form of knowledge, it can be considered knowledge in the form of practical wisdom. That there is a certain level of intellectual skill and cognition necessary, as shown by Aristotle's account of virtue, that requires levels of knowledge that go over and above simply reacting to situation. It involves understanding why we should react in that manner, and understanding what the right reaction is.